Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and it's time for another Shadows in the Warp. In this episode, and in the following 3 episodes, I'm going to be reviewing more of the new Tyranid models. So we have the Tyrannocyte that I'll be covering right now, and then in the video in the link below, which will be in the vault, I'm going to talk about the new Zoanthrope rules, and also just show you the new Venomthrope as well and how it compares with the old model. And then in the next 2 episodes after that will be the Sporocyst and the new Mucolid Spore Mine. So let's start with the Tyrannocyte. But before we get into that, check out my new shirt. Evolution, it's a gene stealer. Well, not a gene stealer because that would be trademark infringement, but it's some sort of alien that kind of resembles a gene stealer. So we have 2 new types of shirts, actually a few more shirts in our store, but there's 2 new Tyranid ones. One of them looks like this, and it's kind of like the evolution of the Space Marine one, but instead with a gene stealer. And the other one is actually the evolution of a gene stealer cult. And so it starts with a gene stealer, goes through the 4 generations, and ends with a gene stealer. You can check that out at miniwargaming.spreadshirt.com, along with all of our other shirt designs. Anyway, let's talk about this bad boy, the Tyrannocyte. The Tyrannocyte is the Tyranid drop pod, but it doesn't function exactly like a drop pod, but it kind of does function like a drop pod, and it's kind of like the old Mycetic Spore, but it's not like the old Mycetic Spore. So I want to talk about a few things. I want to review the model itself and how much I like it, and then I want to talk about the model rules and then possible things that you can use this for in your games, besides, obviously it's a drop pod, that's what you're going to use it for. So let's start by looking at the model. I've got 2 variations here. You can have it like this with the armor plates closed, or you can have it like this with the armor plates open. And that kind of represents it when it's falling down from the sky fluff-wise. It comes down like this, and then when it gets close to the ground, it opens up like this to slow its descent. And it doesn't actually act like the old Mycetic Spores where it hits the ground and disgorges its occupants. Instead, it actually floats and stops above ground and then kind of poops them out onto the ground, kind of like the Overlord from StarCraft, except that it's not a synapse creature or anything like that, and it fires, and yeah. But it does share similarities to the Overlord from the Zerg. Not that that's a bad thing at all. The Zerg were copied from the Tyranids anyway, so might as well return the favor. So how does it work then? As when we look at the whole model, there are the 5 guns, and there's the different variants, the Death Spitter, Barb Strangler, and the Venom Cannon. The person who modeled this for us actually made it so I have one of these that are pinned, so they can actually pull out and stick the other ones in. It's not very hard to do that. I don't know if you need to bother to do that, because you can call this a Death Spitter, you can call it a Barb Strangler or a Venom Cannon, and sure, somebody who's Tyranid savvy will be able to see the difference, but it's a very small proxy thing. The model, I love. I think it is fantastic looking. It doesn't have a humongous base. It doesn't have one of the oval ones, and so it doesn't take up a huge amount of space. As much as it has these tentacles, they don't get in the way as much because they're so high off the ground, so typically they're not going to be a problem. And it just looks fantastic, and I love it. I think it's just a really good replacement for the Mycetic Spore. And in some ways, I'm kind of happy that we don't have the Mycetic Spore because we get this thing instead. The Mycetic Spore was cool, but we never had a model for it. Maybe it would have been cooler if we did have the model, but it's immobile. So yes, I would give it an A+ for the way the model looks, because it looks cool. So let's talk about the rules. Now you can get the rules for free at blacklibrary.com. If you go to the digital editions area where you normally get the FAQ and errata, actually click on FAQ and errata, and then there's another button that says free downloads, I think it says, and it has all the new Tyranid rules. And the Tyrannocyte, Sporocyst, and Zoanthropes, and the Mucolid Spore are all now available there. Now you can also find them in this book, the Shield of Baal Leviathan book, which has the rules here. And this also comes with a lot of different formations that you're able to use some of these new models with, and also some of the old models as well. I strongly recommend that book, but I'm going to probably do a separate video that talks about that new book and reviewing it. And so we get this wonderful thing right here, the Tyrannocyte. And like I said, it's totally available for free. So how does it work? Well, the Tyrannocyte acts like a Space Marine drop pod in the sense that it can't mishap unless it scatters off the table. In other words, when you go to deep strike it, it comes in from reserve as normal, and when it lands and scatters, if it scatters on top of impassable terrain or within an inch of an enemy model or on top of a friendly model, you just reduce the scatter distance until it's no longer mishapping and everything is hunky-dory. After it lands, it disgorges its occupants and says basically that the unit must disembark. As soon as it arrives, it must disembark. And so then you place the unit within 6 inches of the Tyrannocyte. Now this is important to understand the wording. Unless they FAQ this or out of this, the wording actually makes it work differently than a transport. See, with a transport, you have the transport model and you actually move 6 inches from the transport. So if there's like something in the way, you got to go around it and that shortens the distance. But with the Tyrannocyte, it's place the models so that the whole unit is within 6 inches of the Tyrannocyte. Now this allows you, kind of like the Tervagon when it spawns Termagants, they don't come out of the Tervagon even though you think so. It could actually be on the other side of a wall that is 100 feet tall, and it could spawn Termagants on the other side of it because you just place them within 6 inches. This allows you a little more flexibility than you would get with a drop pod. It's not an assault vehicle or anything like that, so they can't move or charge on the same turn that they disembark. Now what can go inside of a Tyrannocyte? Now this is a huge upgrade from the MySet Explorer. Anything can go inside of it with some limitations. It can hold a unit of 20 normal models. It says a unit of 20. Now I'm assuming, although it doesn't clarify this really well, but I'm just going to assume this, that if the model has a bulky or very bulky rule, it's going to take up more than one slot. I'm going to take it like a transfer capacity of 20, even though it doesn't use that wording. And that's the issue here, that we might be treading on the territory of rules as written and rules as intended. I believe that they intended it to be a transport capacity of 20, because right here it says it can carry a single unit with a Tyrannus faction and has a capacity of 20. So yeah, so it's a transport capacity of 20, and so bulky models take up 2 and very bulky models take up 3. So you have to take that into consideration when you bring in your warriors or zone thropes or things like that. But it can also bring a single monstrous creature. That counts as taking up the entire 20 slots, which is great because you can bring a monstrous creature. With the old MySet Explorer, the only thing you could really bring as a monstrous creature was a single Carnifex, and it just wasn't that interesting. It's kind of cool, but you got a Carnifex, which you just, whatever. And that was in the old Codex, where Carnifexes weren't even that great. So now you could still bring a Carnifex, but you could also bring a Hive Tyrant. You could bring a Tyrannifex with Acid Spray and Desiccator Larva, so that it pops out and puts down a Torrent Strength 6 Flamer and also a Fleshbane Flamer. That sounds pretty good. I like that idea. Or you can do the old 20 Termagants with Devourers, which I love. It's expensive, but allows you to all of a sudden unload 60 Strength 4 shots wherever you like. Also, the pod is fearless. It does not have any instinctive behavior rules, which is wonderful because it would just be kind of annoying if it did. But it is not allowed to run, nor is it allowed to charge. Now it can be charged, it just can't charge. So it basically has to just kind of float around up to 6 inches every turn, which is nice that it's not immobile and it's still scoring. So you can drop this thing right by objectives and grab it, even though it doesn't count as like a objective secured if you're using the Combined Arms Detachment or Allied Detachment or some other formation, but it can still hold objectives, which is wonderful. And then it has 5 guns. It, by default, for 75 points, comes with 5 Death Spitters. Now it's Ballistic Skill 2, so those are not going to do very much, but you can upgrade it for 25 points to have 5 Barb Stranglers, so Large Blast Strength 4, or 5 of the Venom Cannons, which is Small Blast Strength 6. Now, there's some interesting rules issues with this, because rules is written, it basically says that in the shooting phase, at the end of the shooting phase, but before morale tests are taken, these things fire automatically at the closest unit, and each gun can fire at a different unit. Now, you might not think that that's a problem because look at the way the guns are modeled, but then if we remember the monstrous creature rules, the way that the guns are modeled have no effect on anything, because a monstrous creature has 360-degree line of sight. A gun could be pointing this way and you could still fire it that way. That's why flying monstrous creatures are so good, because they could be flying in one direction and fire backwards, and it's totally allowed. You can say whatever you want about the fluff of that, it's just the fact that the rules are there for that. So when you first initially read the rules, it's like each gun can fire at a different target, and you're thinking, well, no it can't, because all 5 of them, you're just going to find the nearest thing to the base, no matter where it is, and then all 5 of those are going to be nearest, and they're all going to fire at it. But in the White Dwarf that introduced the Tyrannocyte, we find that the rules as intended are not the rules as written, which is, a problem, but we find that with Games Workshop rules quite often. And that it actually specifies, it talks about, well, how do you do that? Well, you measure from each gun to the nearest unit. They say that like, duh, that's of course it's what you're supposed to do. That brings us a few problems. Like one, well, first off, it's not rules as written, and now we're going to go into a rules as intended discussion, but it's obviously what they intended because it's in the White Dwarf and they're talking about it. But the problem is that do we give these things like a regular gun on a vehicle, like a 45-degree arc, or do they have like a 180-degree arc, or? If two of them can see the same unit, do they both fire at the same time as per regular shooting rules? That's important if you're firing barbed stranglers, because you're going to be dropping large blasts. So do you resolve them individually, or do you resolve them the same against the unit? It's going to create kind of some confusion there. Also, I've already played with this model in one game, and I brought them all barbed stranglers because I thought that's going to be so cool. We're also just shooting out barbed stranglers everywhere. It's a lot of strength 4 blasts. And he's Bliss at skill 2, and so you don't really want to depend on death spitters. But it actually became tedious. I actually stopped wanting to fire them. Even though they could do damage to something, it was just like, oh, I gotta do even more, because all of a sudden I had 4 of them in the game. And so that's potentially, although a lot of these didn't have line of sight, because I was actually treating them and only shooting the way that they're pointed. But on average, I was getting 3 shots per Tyrannocyte, and there was 4 of them. So that was 12 large blast shots that I had to resolve. And so that got to be a little annoying. And so in the second game with the Sporocyst, I brought just Death Spitters. They didn't do hardly any damage, but I just didn't care. So that begs the question, do you bring it at the 75-point cost, or do you upgrade it to the 100 points? Well, obviously against certain armies, like if I drop these with an Imperial Guard army and I had a bunch of Barbed Stranglers, they're going to just massacre the Imperial Guard army, because if it's all infantry, assuming that it's infantry and not tanks, they're going to be dropping so many large blasts down on top of the infantry, they're going to destroy them. But it does bog the game down a lot. And then they do cost 100 points, which is not a small amount. However, when you couple them with the things that you can really maximize on for deep striking, all of a sudden it makes certain units much more viable. For example, an entire 20-man squad of Termagants that Devours, instead of having 10 of them Devours and 10 Flesh Borers like you might want to do if they're starting on your table edge, becomes very dangerous, as you can drop them behind enemy lines and all of a sudden unload 60 strength 4 shots. That's going to do a lot of damage to almost anything, even vehicles. If you drop it behind the vehicles and you're firing, you can get a lot of glancing hits and possibly destroy several vehicles. It also brings back the whole zone thrope to destroy land raiders kind of strategy, where you don't have to start the zone thropes on the table and hope that you get to the land raider because it's an 18-inch warplant shot. You can just put a group of them in a spore pod in a Tyrannocyte and drop them in. Now there is a question kind of floating around, can you attach a Tyranid Prime to a group and then deep strike them? And there's no obvious answer to that. My thoughts would be no, because the old Mycetic Explorers, they FAQ'd it and said that you couldn't do that. So you kind of guess that their intent is going to be that, but who knows? Because it says they can carry a single unit. It doesn't take up a Force Org slot. So it's kind of like buying a dedicated transport without needing to buy a dedicated transport. They just don't take up anything. And whether it's Unbound or Battle Forged, they don't modify any formations. You could just bring them and stick a unit inside. There's no limitation to which unit can go inside as long as it's Tyranid, obviously. But it doesn't even say which detachment it has to be from. It's just you stick a single Tyranid unit in there and away you go. So can you join it with a Tyranid Prime who is an independent character? I don't think so, but obviously that could be argued. So all sorts of new strategies and tactics are going to come by introducing these. In essence, I'm very, very excited to have them. I don't even care about the guns. I just want to be able to drop pod my Tyranid units wherever I want over the table, because I'm already able to do a lot of board presence with Tyranids if you play them right. You play the Swarm Tyranid army and you can take over the table. And if you're playing Maelstrom objectives, the tactical objectives, then you're going to be able to get so many points that even if you get destroyed, it's going to be hard for your opponent to catch up on the score that you've been able to get. Throw in a couple Tyrannocytes with some heavy hitters to hit the back, and you're great. You can even stick like a Trigon Prime in there. Like, think about it. It's just, the things sound strange when you picture a Tyrannofex fitting inside of this, or a Trigon fitting inside of this, but it just says a single monstrous creature. It doesn't have any limitations. A Hive Tyrant, a Swarm Lord, a Tyrannofex, a Trigon, a Carnifex. Of course, a Carnifex could fit in there. They're little now. They're just small. And of course, when you buy the kit, you can assemble it either as a Tyrannocyte or as a Sporocyte. So that's totally your choice. So there's my review on the Tyrannocyte. Love the model. I think it's going to add a lot of dynamics to what I could do with my Tyranid army. And we did already post a battle report with it up, and hopefully you've already seen that. Otherwise, I might give away some spoilers. The battle report, the battle didn't go super well, but the Tyrannocytes did really well, and I was very happy with them. Although, like I said, it did get bogged down once they were starting to fire all their guns. But in future ones, you might just see me bring 1 or 2 just to deliver something to the back. So I love the Tyrannocyte, definitely an A+ for the Tyranid army, giving them more mobility, more firepower, and more options. So that's the end of this Shadows in the Warp. Go ahead and click the link below to learn more about what I think about the new Zoanthrope, and we'll even take a look at the new Venomthrope and all the new rules that come with that, and the new tactics and strategies that can come from that. So click the link below. Of course, that video is in the MiniWarGaming Vault. If you're not a Vault member, you can still click it and get a free 7-day trial where you can try out the MiniWarGaming Vault and get access to everything in there. That's all the extra battle reports, the other halves of the narrative campaigns, the other review, the Zoanthrope, and so much more. And we hope that you stick around, because the MiniWarGaming Vault is what allows us to make these videos. It actually provides us the majority of our revenue. So if you are a Vault member, thank you very much for supporting us. And you can get it for as little as $3 a month if you get the bronze membership for the yearly amount. It really is not that expensive for the amount of videos that we put in there on a daily basis. So go ahead and click the link below to watch the next Shadows in the Warp, and happy wargaming.